I've met a lot of people who are not comfortable with what I do. And I've met a lot of people who don't like what I do. But I've never met anyone who works in a school who hasn't at their core wanted to make the student experience a really healthy and beautiful experience. It's the getting to there that's the missing piece. And one of the ways we get to there is ask ourselves what we're doing and what we could be doing better.
Hello and welcome to Breaking the Paradigm. I'm your host, Andrew Falstich. The mission of this podcast is to have conversations that break the traditional paradigm of education, whether that's at the classroom level, at the global level, or anywhere in between. We are not interested in rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Rather, we are interested in true transformational change. This is a very special podcast episode that has been nearly 2 years in the making with Jen Cort. Jen is a trusted consultant and speaker. She partners with schools worldwide to foster sustainable growth and inclusivity. With experience in school assessments, capacity building, and strategic planning, she works alongside trustees, leaders, students, and families to address challenges while building on strengths. Known for her approachable and collaborative style, Jen is a sought-after speaker at global conferences, a Third Space with Jen Cort podcast host, and author of Hubs, Help Us Begin. Her work in diversity, equity, and inclusion is widely recognized, with contributions to major publications like The Washington Post and The New York Times. And my own claim to fame is that I get to work with Jen Cort at the Oneness Family Montessori School, where she is our school counselor, among so many other things. And I have Jen's book somewhere on the shelf behind me. So it is truly an excellent read. So thank you, Jen, for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It is funny that it's been almost 2 years since we see each other all the time. We're at a fast pace at Oneness. We're getting stuff done.
We're getting stuff done. And Jen invited me to do this whole cross-pod thing right when we first met. And the truth of the matter is I was way too intimidated to take you up on that offer. But now it's been a year of breaking the paradigm, and now I feel like I'm ready to come close to Jen's level. I know I'm not there yet.
That is not the case at all. And that you need to feel that way, level and beyond. And congratulations on your podcast. I'm very excited. And I'm excited for Third Space listeners to hear this episode when we air it on Third Space.
Yeah. Well, Jen, you're a really exciting guest because you have a really unique role in schools, in systems of education, and your lens as a counselor, in my experience working with you, it provides, in my mind, a really unique stance that you have in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'd love to hear your origin story. How did you get into this work? And now you work with schools around the world. How did that come to be? Where did that start?
Well, my focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice I have no memory of before, because my parents they had different relationships with each of us. And with me, it was very much focused on you have the ability to solve problems and you need to use those abilities. And my mom raised us on a commune called The Farm, which was really rooted in social justice. It still is. And my dad did not live on the farm, super supportive of us living there, but he was a professor to people who are incarcerated, and our house was the permanent address for people leaving incarceration. So I don't remember not having a conversation that didn't include, what are you going to do? So that's been my entire life. Working in this space and the way I do was by accident. I was a principal an independent school, and I applied to be a head of school, and I had the privilege of being offered a head of schoolship, but it would have required a move, and my family at the last minute, some stuff happened, weren't ready to move. And I just kept going back to that. This is where my heart is. It's my mission. It's my ethics. It's everything. But I didn't think I should take a space in the conversation because of my identifiers. I'm a white, cisgender, heterosexual, middle-aged lady. But I reached out to a lot of amazing practitioners who said, we need everyone, and we need everyone in the conversation. And then we need people to know when to move out of the conversation. So that's how I ended up doing this. And that's been 10 years now.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful story. And I actually didn't know that about your dad. That's in fact a similarity between the two of us. My mom is a college professor and has worked for years in prisons in the state of Connecticut. And before she was a professor, worked as a social worker in state prisons as well.
Love the social workers. And that's crazy that we didn't know that. See,
Yeah.
we need to have these
That's why we need to have these conversations. And, I think that this is a moment right now, and I'd love to hear your take on this, where folks who are white really need to step up in terms of our DEI work. And I come back to the phrase, and I think it was Bettina Love that coined it, that our white privilege is like a credit card that never runs out. And so we can continue to spend it and use it and be disruptive and step into moments of injustice and not face the type of social or, in our current day, political or whatever else they might be, consequences. Mm-hmm. So, given this time that we're in, how has that shaped your work and maybe even your sense of urgency for your own positionality in this DEI work?
Yeah, it's something that, I'm old enough to remember when we believed that if you admitted you had bias or privilege, you were also saying that you were racist. And so you never said those things. And I have memories of, I no longer have the shame around it because shame brains can't learn. So I've let that go. But I hold on to the memory of it for how seductive it is, that I remember trying to convince a colleague of color that I didn't have bias because of who I was or what I did, and that I'm a social worker and a Quaker and all the things. And now I'm keenly aware that I have a brain, therefore I have bias, and I experience white privilege every moment of every day. And so to me, it feels like the urgency, it's not even a feeling, I know the urgency has always been there. I just don't know that we have all tapped into it and still need to. But certainly when we look at what's happening so quickly in our lives, and, I don't know how many of your listeners know, but we live in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And so our area is being impacted in a different way because of the job layoffs and others. But those provide cloaks to avoid some of these conversations, because it's not about, my white privilege. I don't have time for that. It's about job security. Mm-hmm. And so the urgency it's always been there. It's just something that it's easy. Part of our privilege is that we can forget that. We can let other things take priority for us.
Yeah. And that can be a defense mechanism to say, because I'm focused on this thing or that thing, I'm not going to consider that privilege I have or consider other injustices that are going on, and where we might need to speak up. And, I can say that not only is that something that I've certainly done myself in different parts of my life, but other folks in my family, other friends of mine have said the same thing. And, it's something that I've continued to try to incorporate into my own practice of how do we call people into that work and into conversation in a way that doesn't have them go into that place of, well, I can't worry about that because I'm actually worried about this other thing. Because the reality is there are other people who can't afford to not worry about these issues of DEI and the changes that are happening in our world today.
Yeah, and I think you do. I mean, I hear you in class a lot. Our school's really small and I don't have an office. So I'm often in class in the hallway, and I hear you in class, and you do a beautiful job of bringing our students into the conversation in a way that feels invitational, but also compulsive. And in bringing them in, it's not, you don't tell them what to think or anything like that. You just invite them, and you also talk about history in a way that is more expansive. And I think those are things that we can't underestimate how important that is.
And, the way I think about it too is from a Montessori perspective. Montessori's view of the cosmos is that it is our human nature to live in equitable interdependence with humans and the more than human world. And so if we take that seriously, then DEI is at the core of that vision. We cannot live in a world of equitable independence if we're not actively engaged in DEI. And so it's an invitation and a calling in. And I also try to think about it as, how can I tap into that nature that we have to be pro-social, to really care about the well-being of other people. And it's countercultural in some ways in this current moment. And yet I find that it resonates deeper with our being, that we want to be connected with others, because of course, these systems of racial hierarchy are fragile and damaging to all of us. White supremacy is damaging to white people. It doesn't allow us to be fully human, doesn't allow us to show up in our whole humanity, despite the privilege that it provides for us. And, I think that disruption allows all of us, both our young people and certainly myself, to be fully human and vulnerable in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the conversation often gets stuck when there's something that is urgent. I mean, urgency and biases, their favorite place to grow is when we're in a hurry. Like
Yeah.
that's their best growing space. So, I think people hear these conversations and they may think, well, but having a job, using the previous example, worrying about job security is a real thing. Obviously it is, but it's a both and. Focusing on dismantling structures of hierarchy, if you look at it as that huge piece that it is, the mountain that it is, it's overwhelming and it would take away from the urgency of making sure you have job security, for example. But there's so many things we can do in small ways that have a big impact, and then in medium ways, as long as it's just part of our practice. And that's the part that it is very much of what have you done today that benefits you because of your identifiers and your privileges that go with them, and what have you done that you're helping to break down the system. And it should be. I mean, I love one of our students a couple years ago, Jules. He said something, I can't remember. He said it so much more beautifully than I would say it, but he said, if you can't look back and think of something you did that day that you could connect to working on bias and privilege, then think harder, because if you could take something you've already done and help to see that in it, then where you can build on the practices you already have. That doesn't mean, take something that is not at all connected and pretend that it is. It's just, how could I connect anti-bias work to whatever I did, how I spoke to someone in the grocery store, how could I do that in those spaces that I'm already in, so that you build those muscles, so then you can build on other practices.
Right. And I think that speaks to how engaging in DEI work or an anti-bias, anti-racist work is really less about what we do and more of how we are in particular spaces, and those reflexes that we have, and have we really thought and interrogated how we react when we're not thinking, or how we react when we're surprised, or whatever that might be. Those are the moments where, if we've internalized those ways of being, we will act the way that we most desire to act. But if it's an add-on, or if it feels like we have to do some monumental task, we forget that our society is built on human interaction. And in every human interaction, we have that opportunity to do something different, to act in ways that are inclusive in nature and be disruptive, both in small and in large ways.
Yeah. I mean, it's something really small thing, but it's a big thing. This is a task that I love to ask schools to do. And I'm going to encourage everyone to have a good cup of tea before you do it. But to walk through your school and invite other people to walk through your school, looking only for the messaging, the visible messaging in your school. So I have been in so many schools that are doing great work, and they're really committed to focusing on equity in all areas of the school. But then you see that the school was founded in the 1870, when nobody else could have gone to that school except for wealthy, white, presumably heterosexual cisgender men. Or you go into a room and you see pictures of all the heads of schools, and it's only the last couple of years, if even then, that you see someone of color or a female, or you see all the boards, or just looking at the unintentional messaging that you're sending. And I'm saying unintentional with hope, but I've been in many schools. So if any school's listening to this and you think I'm talking about your school, I'm telling you, this is not unique to you. Where there'll be a room that you're in, some conference room or something. Wouldn't it be great if we had a conference room someday?
Yeah. Someday, yes.
But you're in a conference room and there are pictures of beautiful children on the walls, and they represent many racial and ethnic identifiers and gender and more. I'm making a lot of presumptions here. Then in the same room, you'll have pictures of all of the faculty when the school started, or all of the heads of schools, or all the boards, or all the board chairs, and they're all these messages. I mean, I invite schools to sit in those spaces and look at, what is this saying? And do we keep up both? But then do we have a conversation about how this is where we started and this is where we're going? Or do we just have these images up and we don't discuss them? Because that's what usually happens. I mean, that's not a big thing, but it is a big thing. And so we're not talking about dismantling all the systems in your school in 1 year, because that's unrealistic. And please don't say that you're going to do that.
Because you're probably not.
Well, after George Floyd's death, a lot of schools came out and said, we're anti-racist. And many of us who are practitioners were like, no, you're not. And you want to be. And that's amazing. So say that. Don't say that you're something that you're not, because you're hurting people when you make promises that you're not really keeping.
Gosh, I mean, no, but it was beautiful. And it reminds me of my own private New England prep school that I attended. And so it was started in 1804. It was actually the same person who founded that school founded Wesleyan University, which I know is close to Jen's heart. And so it started in 1804. It was a religious school at one point, hasn't been for, 100 or so years. But the chapel where everybody meets for the whole school meeting once every week, at least when I was there, once every week, has all of the portraits of the heads of school from 1804. And it was two schools that merged. So there's quite a lot of heads of schools. All of them are elderly white men, every single one. And even just until you said that, I'd never really thought consciously about that imagery, that when we gather as a community, the only faces of the school's history that are looking down on us are those white men. And my school, interestingly enough, the tagline is the global school. And they were the first school to ever have a Chinese student study in the US. And they talk about being international. And then the one gathering place only features white men.
Yeah.
Like what? And it's not because there's, again, I would lean into the unintentional part of what you said. It's not that anybody is trying to exclude, but the history is exclusionary. And then what do we do about that?
Especially chapel. I mean, that I would assume that's meant to be the community time. Like,
Yep.
I assure you, through your experiences, you didn't think about it until now. I assure you, you have classmates who thought about it every day they sat in that room.
Yep.
And so, on the one hand, I've been in schools where I've had this conversation, and I have the privilege of going to a school, and then, what's the worst they're going to do? Ask me not to come back? I mean, my job is to say the hard things. And they'll say, we want to honor them. And I'm like, look, no one from this person's family comes in here looking for this painting. This person, hundreds of years ago. Perhaps so there are other ways to honor people, or at least put something up that says, this is where we are. I don't know, but something, because, we've got kids who are harmed when they don't see themselves. Not just kids. We have faculty and staff who walk through those spaces where we've promised them spaces of equity and global, being a global school. And then they have to look at those images.
And, it speaks to, I saw this quote the other day that said, we don't want to write or show the world that has been. We want to write and show the world that could be. And when we only give those images of what was, well, that's what people assume is the default to reproduce. But then what would it be like to flip that? Doesn't mean we're not honoring, but what would it look like to create the vision of the future that we want? Because schools are diverse. To your point, they have diverse students, or at least hopefully they should, diverse faculty and staff. So how do we create the space that communicates that is our value, that is our aspiration, and, totally flips that on its head?
Yeah. I mean, if you're thinking of racial diversity as well. And so, there are all of those. And I'm not pretending it's easy. I mean, we have the privilege of working in a school that was founded on peace, and it's called a family school. And still, we struggle with these conversations.
Yep.
And our families know. I mean, we're not a school that many schools struggle because families don't feel they get all of that information when they enroll. And colleagues come to work at our schools and they don't feel they get the full story of the work the school needs to do. And then they're there and they feel, deceived. And then that's where a lot of the tension is. So our families know upfront who we are, and our students know, and we're crystal clear about it. And still, it's something that we have to make sure we're intentional about discussing, because we can fall back on the privilege of this is who we are. So we kind of just assume. And we also, we have human beings who work and go to our school, and humanness is messy. So I'm not pretending any of it's easy, but it is nice to be in a space where there's nothing that I can't talk to students about.
Mm-hmm.
No one's ever, maybe I shouldn't, I don't know. But nobody's ever said to me, hey, that's a step too far or anything like that. In fact, it's usually been, you can go further.
Right, because all meaningful learning has a context, and particularly from a counseling standpoint, if you're really responding to what our students need, it just makes total sense that you would have the license to do that. and more schools should. And so so as we're talking about, these bigger systems that schools are thinking about, I want to congratulate you, Jen, because you have just created I think the name is the Equity Inventory.
Yes.
And that is to work on helping the administrative sides of school really dig into their own DEI work. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that tool. And so as we're talking about these things that schools can do, how might a tool like that help them? What was its genesis and where and how is it being used?
Yeah. So is it okay if I give a little history of the group I did this with?
Please, yes.
So with my colleague Amber at National Business Officers Association, so NBOA, NAIS, the National Association of Independent Schools, a while ago, and I'm not going to say this history correctly, but the essence is they really wanted to focus on the teaching side of schools. And so they split, and NBOA was created, and they focus on the non-teaching side of schools. So for independent schools, that would be admissions and development, alumni, and all the non-teaching departments. And these departments are the groups that are most often or more often not the people in those positions are not educators who may come from business models and business backgrounds. They're the ones who are either deciding or operationalizing decisions around hiring and contracting and all the pieces, how we spend our money, how we talk about the school, all of everything externally facing and everything infrastructure. And so I've had the privilege of working with a lot of independent schools, and I find over and over again that there's nothing to help the non-teaching side of schools that is specific for them to assess their work around DEI, to get a gauge of where they are, to start the conversation. And I'm recovering from having done to a lot of colleagues over the years where I used to require everyone who worked for a school to be in my sessions if I was doing like one-on-one work or onboarding work or going deeper. And I would try to differentiate for the non-teaching side of school, but the reality is I often fell into the teaching side. And I did that, and many practitioners did that. And on top of that harm, this was also often on professional days or opening weeks or closing weeks when those departments, especially facilities, they can get so much done when the teachers are not in their spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't do that anymore. I've gone back and apologized. When I've worked in schools on the repeat, I've apologized to them. But I really felt like there needed to be something specific for them. And I'd been feeling that way for a while. And I mentioned it to my colleagues at NBOA, with whom I've had the privilege of spending a lot of time. And they had been thinking the same thing. And they found an instrument that one of the schools had made, and they liked it, but it didn't quite work with what they wanted. And so that school gave us the permission to adapt it. And we did. And we adapted it, we expanded it, we manipulated it. You kind of have to look a little bit sideways to see where the origination is, but it's there. And MBOA was willing to do it. So I'm very proud of it. Any school, and a lot of your teachers who are listening may not know, for independent schools, they may not know that their schools are often members of MBOA, because I go to those conferences and I see all those folks from your schools. So ask your schools, because if you're a member, you can have access to all of it. And it's meant to be visually unoverwhelming. This is the first iteration. We're hoping to expand it so that you can look at it and say, hey, this is what my department's doing now. This is what we, do we align with do we talk about our mission and admissions? Do we have language that we know to use in development, especially when potential donors or current donors ask us questions about our work in DEI? And you just go through and you assess, and it's literally just a multiple choice option. And then it will give you some resources, like here are some things you could do for this. And here's some, here's a video that you could show to connect your mission to DEI. And here's an article you could read. And those resources are gleaned from NBOA's current resources, as well as many other practitioners. They gave me a wide latitude to gather resources that I use, some of which I created, so I definitely believe in them, and a lot of which come from amazing practitioners. But there just really hasn't been anything. I would have loved to have found something a while ago and give it to schools. And so they launched it at annual session last month. And it was really exciting to hear people react and to ask questions. And especially because last month being February, and I don't know when people listen to this, but is a month after inauguration of President Trump. So lots of questioning about, what are you going to do? Are you going to dial back? Are you going to pull back? And MBOA said, we really care about equity, which includes the people in these positions. They need to have equity in terms of access to information and to understanding. So yeah, really proud of it, really happy that they did it, and excited to hear how people are already using.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing work, Jen. So I'm wondering why there hasn't been anything in terms of DEI for the business side. Like, what do you attribute that to, that there's been all this work on the teaching side of DEI and really nothing for the administrative piece?
I don't know anything officially, but my theory is that honestly, and this is a hard thing to say, it's a hard thing to believe, but I think as schools, we haven't done the deep work, and I'm generalizing because obviously a lot have, but we haven't done the deep work, because if we had, we would know that there isn't anything specific to them. So we do a lot of student facing work, but we haven't gone into those other spaces. We haven't done things like ask ourselves, are we checking to see if our vendors are in mission alignment with us? And how do we talk to them about that? And if they're not, but they're the cheapest ones, what do we do? And so I think it's just, we haven't looked at the systems and structures that uphold our schools. And if they're upholding our schools, and independent schools in particular, then they're upholding work that is not equitable in what we're doing, because our schools were not founded, they were not built to be places of equity. So we have to work even harder to ensure that they are.
Yeah. And so they're not built as places of equity, and they're also existing in systems that are not equitable by design. And so it really sounds like this is an invitation for schools to step more into systems level change, both in their own internal work, but in the ways in which they interact with other entities outside of the school.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, how do you make your mission visible? I mean, I believe your mission is visible in your budget. It's visible in your calendar. It's visible in your retention. It's visible in all these ways that are textural and tangible and are all impacted by everyone who experiences your school in any way. And so those are the systems that we want to work with. And I've never met I've met a lot of people who are not comfortable with what I do. And I've met a lot of people who don't like what I do, but I've never met anyone who works in a school who hasn't at their core wanted to make the student experience a really healthy and beautiful experience. It's the getting to there, that's the missing piece. And one of the ways we get to there is ask ourselves what we're doing and what we could be doing better.
Yeah. And you said it so beautifully. Giving every student a great experience means integrating DEI, period.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned how obviously there's conversations in the education space, given the climate that we're in, about what are schools going to do. We've seen federal funding be weaponized for universities. We are looking at the potential dismantling of the Department of Education, although that's also a congressional appointed office. So technically the executive doesn't have the authority to do that. So what can educators do in this moment of difficulty to really stand in the importance of this work? What are you seeing in the field, and maybe what recommendations would you give for folks who value this work and know it's important, but are wondering what the best way to move forward is?
It's a hard question to answer because I know what I'm going to say is controversial.
I love it. That's what we try to do on this podcast.
I'm not afraid of, but there's no but. I'm not afraid of that. I don't think we have to go head on and have, we're not playing football where we have to tackle each other. So, if I'm at a school, as I was the other day, where they said, you can't say the word diversity here. And I could have a fight about that. And I could say that I'm not going to work there. And I have the privilege of having other jobs available to me. Or because I've lost so much work since all this has started, I could really adapt what I'm saying so that I could fit into those spaces. But that's a waste of my time and energy, and nothing is going to come of it. So instead, I said, okay, tell me what your goal is for this time. What do you, the magic question that we counselors ask all the time. You wake up tomorrow and you've made this time together has made an impact. What will it sound like and look like? And the principal said, I would hear students feeling that their teachers care about them in a way that is authentic. And I was like, all right, that we can do. So instead, we talked about, how do you authentically listen to students? How do you ask questions? How do you say things, incorporate into your practice things like, you just told me your gender identity. I didn't grow up talking about that. So what's important for you for me to know about that? That's not saying DEI, right? So to me, it's about like, I don't need to stand on the other side of the bridge and have the fight about what words we're going to use. That's just not of interest to me. I don't have time for that. Social workers, we're trained, go to the other side of the bridge and we say, okay, we need to take one step forward. What do we need to do that? You want to focus on authentic listening? That's a building block for creating equitable spaces. So let's focus on authentic listening, and then we'll stretch it from there for sure. By the end of the conversation, we did get to, where we would have started. We just did it backward. So that's one. The other thing is to continue doing your own work, like continue thinking about your biases, your privileges. I have almost a mathematical equation with this. It's simple. You just think about all of your identifiers, race, gender, sexual orientation, belief system, all of them. And ask yourself, do I have to navigate around this identifier to get through the day? Navigating around, do I have to navigate around is really different than, do I think about this? I mean, as a white person, I think about my whiteness all the time. Or let me be honest, not all the time, because I have the privilege not to. And I definitely fall into that. But I think about it a lot. But I don't have to navigate it around it. I am a woman. I do have to navigate around my gender, traveling by myself, for example. So any identifier you have that you don't have to navigate around to get through the day is one that you are ascribed privilege for. You didn't ask for it, but you get privilege for it. And so pick one of those and begin thinking about bias around that. So right now I'm doing my work that I'm doing is around ability privilege, that I can move through spaces without accommodations. So that's what I'm working on. So you just pick one of your identifiers, focus on the biases that go with that identifier and the privileges that go with it, and do your own work. The more you do that, the more that work will become evident, and you will either your students for whom they don't experience privilege around that will really hear it, or, well, it's not even an either or. That'll be one. The other is other students are going to start to hear it, and it starts to seep into what they're thinking. Those are small things, but they have a big impact. We need to do our own work every day, no matter what. In the best of times, we need to do our own work.
Yeah. That's something we talk a lot about here on this podcast is the inner transformation of the practitioner and what my friend Tammy Esting calls a vitally responsive practitioner. And if we're really attuned to who our young people are and our own inner work of unpacking our own experiences, our own biases, our own ways of walking through the world, then we can be vitally responsive to them because we're not letting our own stuff get in the way. And it's a journey, and it has to be. And what I heard from your story about how you're working with schools, it's really about how do we get people to be on that journey where they might be scared away by particular terminology, depending on their context, depending on who they are, depending on the school setting that they exist in. Everybody, in my view, who's working in education has to be on this path of inner transformation. Certainly, I still am and always will be. And as soon as I stop is the moment I'm going to choose another career path, because we just have to do that work. And I've also been struck by how working with adolescents, they have really transformed me. And they are the ones who will help me unpack where my knowledge needs to be updated and thought through. And in the work with our students at Oneness, I've certainly felt that way. And they have really shown me different ways of being, different understandings of DEI, how it manifests for them in their own context, in their own lives. And as much as I can help them see and understand the world, they're also giving me a new lens of how I should see myself in the context of the world and how I can best support them in their own work of forming their own identities as they are adolescents.
Yeah. And they call us on it. And that's something that you do and I do. Like, we let them know that they can tell us when we're not, when we're showing that we have learning to do. And that's a vulnerable thing to do, but it's a really powerful exercise. And it's, I think about how we can learn from what we tell them when they're young. We tell them if somebody falls down on the playground, that you should help them get up. and that you should also make sure if they tripped over a twig that you move the twig, right? And so we can learn these same lessons. If somebody is hurt because of their identifiers and the injuries that are just freely floating around now, we can say something about that. And not going to someone on the side and saying, "Hey, I saw that thing happen and I feel really badly about it." I mean, that's only helpful if you're also going to say it in the space where it happened and with the people with whom it happened. And those are muscles that we have to build up. The one other thing I was thinking about as you were talking about, I love that quote. That's beautiful. I'm gonna copy that and ascribe it properly. Is that it's really easy for us to turn away from this work. It's the easiest thing. And we are that just thinking about how easy it is to say that, well, the fact that it's a conversation where there's a choice is a profound situation that we find ourselves in. I mean, there's always been a choice, but now it's literally been named as a choice. Those are all things that I think we need to be more considerate of as we're going through our day, especially when we're working with children, because our unintentional messaging is as harmful or as positive for them as our intentional messaging.
It absolutely is. And that same person that coined the vitally responsive practitioner, she said something to me. We were met in Chicago at a conference. She said that our young people are co-regulating with us. And that I'd never heard it said that way before, but it's absolutely true. The things that we are radiating are impacting them, and likewise, they are impacting us. Mm-hmm. And if we're open to that, and if we recognize how impactful our own radiance, our own way of being is, then it really helps us to be on that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I don't know. I think it's one of the most immense privileges I have every day is to learn from students. And it is a vulnerable thing to stand before them and say, I'm learning and I'm growing. And when I don't get it, you can tell me, and then secretly hope they don't ever have anything to tell us.
Right. And then when they do, it's usually gold. It's like, oh, why did I think of that?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And our students will tell us.
They will. And that's something that I appreciate about the older adolescent is they're really beginning to solidify their personality. They're seeing themselves in the world. And they have a greater sense of confidence to say, in conversation of, I'd really appreciate if you tried this or tried this other thing, or, Andrew, I understand you mean well, and right, those conversations can be had. And that's where that mutual transformation takes place. And I wouldn't have it any other way. And so it kind of sort of leads into my next question, which is, as I've said on this podcast, we're in a difficult time, and what I would like to hear from you, Jen, is what brings you hope in this work of DEI in this time right now? What brings you hope?
Working with kids. I don't know how to spend time with young people and not feel hopeful. That's from just a human perspective. But I also know from a research perspective that, young people today, and I'm saying young people today because it's from 2000 on, I did a study of 100 years of U.S. history looking for when each of the identifiers had significant changes. And many have before 2000, but they're oddly marked in history. So like civil rights movement never ended, but it's marked in the 60s. Women's movement never ended, marked in the 70s. And so you've got these pockets and these moments of conversation and deep work. But then you get to 2000, and since 2000, almost all of the identifiers, race, gender, sexual orientation, belief system, politics, religion, all, the totality of what I mean by belief system, ability, and so many more have had significant changes. So we have young people today with completely different experiences with language, maybe without the experiences of the moment. So didn't go through the civil rights movement as it was marked in the 60s, but have experienced conversations around race that are completely different than the adults in their lives. And so their memory is rooted in that these things just are. And you can look at, looking at students today, if you're thinking about LGBTQ+, even just 5 years ago, students would say, well, this is who I am, and do you know what that means? And now they assume that we know because they have no memory of before. So one example that I give a lot, just because it's more obvious, is that people born in 2003 and 4 even though they've had 3 white presidencies since President Obama, and he was president for 2 presidencies, their norm, their anchor memory, I call it, is having a president of color. So having a white president is an anomaly for them. But they're being raised and educated by adults for whom, or, older adults, because now they're, in their 20s, for whom having a president of color is the anomaly. And so we're in this time where, I've talked about gender identity several times because it is the third rail right now, though, it was something else before and it'll be something else after. But the alpha generation that started in 2010, they have a completely different relationship with gender than any other generation before them. And so I get hope by knowing that they don't know of a time before. And that doesn't mean they're totally accepting or totally aware. It just means that, they can't look at commercials today and see a makeup commercial looking like it did 20 years ago, which was, I remember being excited. I'm brunette, that there was a brunette model for makeup. And I was like, look at that. A brunette can be a makeup model. And now I show them that commercial from the same company that they're looking at now and seeing all identifiers. And they're like, what's wrong with that? I'm like, yeah, that's what most adults in your life grew up with. So I get hope from them because they are ever present, fully engaging, dynamically interesting, my favorite group of people to spend time with. And I get hope from them because their anchor memories are locked into something that is a reality that most of us don't have. And I wish we would all just sit down and learn from them and listen and tell them we don't know, because they also need to know that we don't know. That's what I get hope from.
I'm so glad you brought up that example of how when young people are born past certain points, they take things for granted about our world that we don't. Because actually the first time I ever met Jen, she gave a professional development on this exact topic. And my mind was blown because I'd never considered how young people who were born not that far after me had a completely different paradigm of the world because of what was happening at that time. And, I think that my answer would be the same. What gives me hope is working with these young people because they experience the world in a completely different way. And they don't have the same learning curve when it comes to all of these things: race, gender, sexual orientation, system of belief. It's so much easier for them to transcend those boundaries and to create something that's really special. And I don't think we think about that. We talk about it being hard for us to wrap our heads around. I mean, I remember when Obama was elected, it felt like this, oh my gosh, how could this even be possible? This is so groundbreaking. And yet, for just like you were saying, people born after 2004, that's their norm.
Yeah, it's their anchor memory. Exactly. I mean, take one other example. I mean, some of the examples I've given are the ones that are the harder ones to talk about. But take mental health, for example. So, I mean, I'm a counselor and I've been a counselor off and on for 34 years. And I remember with such clarity when parents would call me and say, my child's been diagnosed with depression, but they don't know. We don't want them to feel badly about themselves, so they don't know. And it was this big secret. And getting therapy was a big secret, and getting testing was a big secret. And now I work with some of students on, like, it needs to be a little bit more of a secret. Like, you don't need to just walk into the hallway and say, hey, I forgot to take my, ADD meds today.
Yeah.
And I don't mean any shame in that. I just mean not everyone needs all your information until you know them. So if we look at, like, how amazing is that for them to be unburdened by the, generational shame around mental health, to the point where now they're casual about it. I mean, I was doing a workshop and a student walked in and said, sorry, I'm late. I'm having an ADD moment. And I was like, so that's not a thing. But also what you're describing, you claiming language that you can use in a way to describe something where you weren't particularly focused. I mean, that's just amazing, isn't it? That they have no memory before universal design. So when they go to buildings where there isn't access for everyone's ability, that's weird. I love that that's weird. It should be weird. It should have always been weird.
Yeah, it should have been. And so it's funny, you remind me that at my private high school, it was a historic campus. So one building had only stairs to get into it, wasn't accessible, and had no running water, because if they updated anything, they'd have to update the whole thing. So in the name of history, I mean, I knew people who had, they broke a leg playing soccer and they'd have to like crutch up the stairs and it would be really hard. Or like, hey, get two friends to help carry you up the steps into math class. But that was just normal for me in my reality, in my context. That would totally be abnormal. And it also reminds me, I had a double podcast episode a few months ago talking about, the first episode was really talking about boys in education. But in our second one, we went beyond and really talked broadly about the gender spectrum and how the way that our young people see gender identity opens up pathways for those who identify as male to not fall into toxic masculinity. Because look, you don't actually have to fit into any of these things. You get to find a place where you really feel like you can be who you are.
Yeah.
And what a gift that is, that has opened up for our young people. And even if it makes us uncomfortable, for whom we grew up feeling like there were only predestined paths, to provide that opening of opportunity for everybody is such a true gift.
Exactly. And it's, when you describe your experience with your school, I mean, look how hard we work to protect tradition. We work really hard.
Yeah, we do.
You broke your leg, you are going to need to hobble around on crutches so that we can protect our tradition. That's what we're doing when we're not looking at these spaces. I mean, every school should take an ability walk. I worked at a school, 146-acre campus. We used to say it was not a campus for people who had mobility needs. But if somebody broke their leg, we figured out how to get them to class. So I was like, so it's not really true. It's just, but we have not made it accessible. And I know it takes a lot of money and everything, but I also know that we're spending money on other things. I know that, I know a school that had a similar campus and they had somebody who applied to the school who, after admission, they had said they were not a campus for people with mobility needs, but after admission, between admission and the start of school, became disabled and needed a wheelchair. And they were like, well, what are we going to do? Well, they moved where that student's classes were. It was inconvenient. I'm sure there were people who didn't love it. But the thing is, in a school, if you do it once, it's a tradition for life. So, I mean, we can make these changes. And, when you think about talking about gender identity, has a potential to free us from thinking about experiencing toxic masculinity. That's just another example of how, when we support the most vulnerable in any identifier, they benefit exponentially, and so does everyone else. Going back to universal design, how many of us use the automatic door openers or the swales on streets or whatever it is that we're using that benefit us? And so this is why when people are debating about the question to engage, everyone, and I hate saying this, but I do, but I say it anyway because it sounds transactional, but all white students, every student, including white students, do better when they have teachers of color.
Yep.
Like, we know this. And we know that everyone does better when they have the ability to access every space that is part of their education. I mean, it's just, everyone does better. And most importantly, the people who most need it do exponentially better. And this whole notion of that means they're going to be better than everyone else. It means that we now have an equal playing field, which is a terrible example when I'm talking about ability.
But you're exactly right. And it should be something that is not seen as a burden, but is seen as what a beautiful opportunity. And I'll share the story. This is a really small scale story, but one of the things that we do at our school, you might know the story, Jen, is that we try to provide multiple ways for people to engage with text that we're reading. So there's the physical book, there's the audiobook that we try to provide. So we try to give multiple options. This particular book that we were reading with my upper level class last year didn't have an audiobook. It was an obscure anthropology text. And there were students in that class who really benefited from that. So one student saw that was a need that wasn't met and decided, you know what? I'm just going to record an audiobook of this for the rest of the community. Mm-hmm. And even folks who didn't need that as an accommodation used this student's audiobook, and it greatly helped them connect with and understand the material. And what a great invitation for a student to have it as their orientation of, if something's not accessible for everybody, how can I make it so? And if that's the culture of the school, not just among the students, but among the staff, that's that place where the mutual transformation can occur, where we can see these inequities and we can respond and we can all be engaged and see it as an opportunity for growth, not as, oh man, we have to spend money and time on whatever that thing might be.
Yeah. And I mean, I think about it as simple as, and that I remember when that was happening, it was such a beautiful thing to watch and to know that the office is being used for that. And that student is exceptional in so many ways and also entirely ordinary in that they are somebody who cares about other people. And isn't that the most ordinary, lovely thing we can do? If we think about it like nut allergies, you know, schools are required to create spaces where students and staff do not have to worry about dying because of nuts being around them. We're required, and we still mess up sometimes, to be sure. And we're an example of that. Like, we're human, right? But everyone knows that's the expectation. So when we mess up, multiple people will tell us, hey, that had nuts in it, or that, is something. So imagine if we approached all of the identifiers in the same way, that we are required to create spaces where people can feel safe to do what they need to do in our schools. If we treated it all like nut allergies, what would be different? We'd get training for everyone. We'd make sure that our policies were in place. We'd make sure everyone who wanted to work for our school knew our expectations. We would for sure make sure families who are applying to our schools knew our expectations, and that would benefit the people whose children have been harmed in other schools because a nut allergy hasn't been supported. I mean, I know it's a really simple way of looking at it, but it's also, it doesn't have to be that complex. And so, can I give one other metaphor?
Yes, please.
I'm full of metaphors this Sunday afternoon. I think about it like math. I mean, if people came into our school and said, yeah, you hired me to teach math and you had these math courses and this is expectation by the time they graduate, but I decided not to do that, we would not go, okay,
Right.
great. Or if parents came in and said, you need to teach math exactly the same way I was taught math, we would say, no, we know more. So we're doing more. So we're growing our skill set because you weren't taught badly. We just know more. And so we're doing more. And so, or if somebody said, I'm worried that you're going to make my child feel like they are terrible if they get a problem wrong, we'd say, no, we create a culture of mistake making around math. We want students to see themselves and see math in the world. And so we're not going to shame them. We're not going to yell at them and make them feel badly. So we already know how to do it. We know how to do it. We just look at identity as this super complex thing, and it is, but the way we create spaces for people, we already know how to do. We just need to translate it to math. I mean, we need to translate it to the skills we already have, right? So if a teacher comes in and says, yeah, I know you told us these are your values, but that's not what I'm going to do. We would work with them. And then ultimately, if they continued that, we would not be the school for them. And we would tell parents that. And if parents are like, the mistake thing can't happen, it's essentially saying, like, you need to protect my child from numbers for the rest of their life. I mean, we would say, no, we teach everyday math. We want to see math everywhere. So we have the ability. We also have the ability to navigate these conversations that are third rail type conversations because we've done it around race. We've done it around sexual orientation. We've done it around ability and mental health. We still have messed up a lot of that and we have a long way to go, but we have the infrastructure of skills that we need to just make stickier and more connected and more endurant.
Mm-hmm.
No, whatever. It needs to endure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that on the one hand, this moment feels particularly difficult. And on the other hand, as my friend, Dr. Nicole Evans from Embracing Equity said to me a couple months ago, she said, we have muscle memory. We've been here before. The history of this country is doing this work, and we're just going to keep doing it. And this is a new iteration of folks trying to prevent it, and we're a new iteration of folks who will continue to do it. Yeah. And so it's new and it's urgent, and it's also part of a history that we are continuing. And we are this moment in the human story that is a continuation from what has come before and seeding the future of what can come next in this important work with our young people.
Yeah. Elizabeth Zenevi of Teaching While White says it just shape shifts, and you have to, we can't spend, I mean, this is not what Elizabeth says, but I'm building on, but we have to be mindful of how much energy we have in a given day. And if we spend all of our energy reacting to the horror and shock of everything that's happening, we're taking that energy from things we could be doing instead. You can't just take your energy from everything all the time. That said, we also have to be careful not to become numb. But If we look at our energy as a sphere, and every bit that you give to one thing, you are taking from something else.
So, Jen, I am mindful of the time. If people want to connect with you, if they want to learn more, if they want to learn more about the equity inventory, where can they go? How can they engage with you on this work?
It's super easy. It's just at jencort.com, and that's CORT.
Awesome. Well, I will link that in the show notes. Jen, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. If you do not already subscribe to Third Space with Jen Cort, please make sure you do. That is an excellent podcast. Jen has been at this work for a lot longer than I have, so she's truly an expert. Definitely go check her out. And to all those listening, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for being here on this episode of Breaking the Paradigm. Breaking the Paradigm is brought to you by the generous subscription of listeners and readers like you. If you enjoyed the ideas that you heard or want to engage further and get our emails straight to your inbox, please consider becoming a free or a paid subscriber on our Substack page. It allows us to get a broader reach, and you'll always get the latest news, updates, and ideas that are thought-provoking and that serve us to break the traditional education paradigm and make education more humanizing together.